Flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Call the roll, please.
Trustee Spurling. Here. Trustee Lee.
Here.
Trustee Hines. Trustee Youngerman.
Here.
Trustee Marisak.
Here.
Trustee Bond.
Here.
We're all here this evening. Moving on to public participation this evening. First off, we have a proclamation designating March 31st, 2014 as Edgar Barron's Day in Montgomery. So read the proclamation. I'll entertain a motion for approval.
So moved?
I'll read it first.
Oh, sorry.
But you moved.
Your reading probably won't change my vote.
Whereas Edgar A. Barron's grew up in this area, graduating from Oswego High School in 1979, and later receiving his bachelor's degree and master's of fine arts in cinema and photography from Southern Illinois University. And whereas Mr. Barron's body of work includes documentary film, experimental shorts, music videos, and public service announcements that have been screened at festivals, film festivals, and broadcast nationally and internationally. And whereas for the past 10 years, his documentary work has explored the many issues at play in the American criminal justice system. And whereas Mr. Barron's most recent documentary, Prison Terminal: The Last Days of Private Jack Hall, tells the story of the final months in the life of a terminally ill prisoner that was nominated for the 2014 Academy Award in the category of documentary short subject. And whereas Prison Terminal: The Last Days of Private Jack Hall will be premiering on HBO March 31st, 2014. And whereas Mr. Barron's success and achievement is an example to all citizens and worthy of recognition and emulation. Now therefore I, Matthew Brawley, as President of the Village of Montgomery, on behalf of its citizens and officials, do hereby proclaim March 31st, 2014 to be Edgar A. Barron's Day in all of Montgomery. And I'll entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Trustee Bond.
Yes.
Trustee Spurling. Yes. Trustee Lee.
Yes.
Trustee Hines. Trustee Youngerman.
Yes.
Trustee Marisak.
Yes.
Excellent. And I don't think he's here this evening, so we'll pass that along to him. All right, we'll move on to the public comment portion of the meeting. I know there's several people that are here to speak on that. Typically, or I guess what the board has, policy in place that it is a 2-minute opportunity. Everybody who wishes to speak, we would hope that you can get up to the podium if you want to. If this goes on for, hours, you can only come up once, but if it goes on for a long time in the public comment, we will ask that you elect a spokesman or whatnot that can come and summarize your issue. But we haven't had to do that in a long time, so I don't think that there's that many people here this evening. So this is the only portion of the meeting where we generally have public comment. So if you do have comments on the subject, specifically the non-home rule versus home rule powers that we're going to talk about, if you have comments on that, now would be your time to address the board.
Okay, my name is Charlotte Lauritsen. I'm a resident of Lakewood Creek West. Do I need to say my phone number?
No, but if you
Sure, it
can
said
sign in
something
on the
about that.
sheet, that'd be, if you can put it on the sheet so we can contact you.
Okay. Just a couple of questions for the trustees. First one, considering the longer time frame for potential implementation of home rule, does the village currently have any new shorter-term plans for addressing the issue of problem houses in our community? If the answer to that is no, would the trustees be supportive of developing and implementing a comprehensive plan specifically to address this issue? Also, what would be the time frame for implementing such a plan? So that's question one. Question two, would the board members be supportive of a coordinated efforts approach among the various departments of the village where repeat or frequent offender houses are concerned to support and increase the effectiveness of the work that is being done by the police, the neighborhood watch, and the residents? Can the board and staff speak to whether and how information about problem houses is currently being shared across village departments?
Thank you. And what we'll do is we'll mark these down and address the ones that we can this evening. If there's something in here that we can't address this evening, then we will definitely get back to you. But we'll do that during the item for discussion 7A. Is there anyone else that wishes to address the board on this? Or any topic? Is there any chance that you guys wanted to address the board this evening? This is the public comment portion.
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm late, so I'm gonna make it quick so you guys go on your meeting. I'm Kevin Williams, I run for Caney County Sheriff, as I stand by, I'm a good friend of mine, and so is Dan Meyer. I just want you to know that there is a sheriff's race out there, a lot of people don't know that, and I'm very passionate, and I'm very committed to the people of Caney County. I work very well, I've built a lot of coalitions and partnerships throughout the county. Matter of fact, Dan and I worked well on a homicide case 2 years ago. Matter of fact, both these gentlemen are endorsing me. So I'm here, I'm not gonna spend a lot of time, I just want you to know I am here, I want you to vote for me on March 18th. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Thank you. All right, if there isn't anybody else, we'll move on. I'll read the consent agenda, and then I'll entertain a motion for approval. Executive session minutes of February 10th, 2014. Minutes of the Committee of the Whole from February 18th. Executive session minutes from February 18th. Minutes from the Village Board meeting of February 24th. The building report for February of 2014. Accounts payable through March 4th, 2014. The cancellation of the March 18th Committee of the Whole meeting. And with that, I'll entertain a motion for approval.
Second.
Moved and second. Take the roll, please.
Trustee Heinz. Trustee Youngerman.
Yay.
Trustee Marisak.
Yes.
Trustee Bond. Trustee Spurling.
Yes.
Trustee Lee.
Yeah.
And that carries 6-0. Moving down, items for separate action this evening, we have the waiver of bid and award of contract to P-Zone Associates of Leland, Illinois, for the 2014 Naturalized Landscape Maintenance Services in the amount of $289,649.38. And with that, I'll ask Director Pubens for a report.
Thank you, President Brawley. As per the board direction, the village issued a request for proposal for naturalized landscape maintenance services this year. We have had the same contractor for several years now, and the board decided that we wanted to go out and see what the competition was like. So we did that. I issued RFPs. We received 4 submittals. 2 of those submittals were significantly lower than the other 2. Those were NCAP and P-Zone Associates. As I think everyone knows, P-Zone has been our contractor for some time now. As you can see in the packet, I've included the entire P-Zone bid. I wasn't planning on going through that entire document with you, but it does lay out all the work that they are proposing based on their knowledge of the basins now that we'll need to do in the upcoming growing season. In looking at the bids and with RFPs, and as we've talked about before, this type of project can be difficult to do a low bid comparison, in part because we asked the contractor, the bidders, to also submit what they feel the scope of work will be. And again, different companies are going to have different opinions on that. So with that in mind, though, we did get 2 bids that were very close to each other. NCAP was on paper the lowest bid at $281,792, and Pizzo was just slightly higher at $289,649. So a difference of just under $7,900, which on a $300,000 project is a pretty tight bid. One thing I tried to do was to look at the bids to see if we were getting an equivalent level of work from both of them. And that's hard to do because you can look at one line item and one of the bidders will have a higher quantity there because they feel that that item is, needs to be in. You look at other line items, it'll go the other way. The other bidder may have a higher number. But one that did jump out was the prescribed fire line item, and Pizzo had a significantly higher number of prescribed fire applications in their scope of work. So if you look at that and try to account for some of the cost difference, there's, in my opinion, between $15,000 and $30,000 worth of work that we're seeing in the Pizzo bid that was not in the other bids. So again, it's not to say that that's the only line item that would, if we look at some others, I think it would probably work the other way as far as quantities and costs. But to try to get some equivalency in the two numbers, I think that's an important one to look at. So my recommendation tonight is to award the bid to Pizzo. They're not the lowest bid on paper, but again, if we look, I think, at the total amount of work that they have presented, that the cost for that is more, a better deal for the village. They certainly have the experience. Again, the $8,000 difference in bids is a pretty small number on this size of a bid. So with that, I'd open it up to any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions of Director Poobens on this?
Pizzo's been the vendor for how long? 5?
It's 2007, I believe.
Okay. So they have a history, they know the history of the basins and where we're at.
Well-established track record. I think we highlighted that not too long ago with our independent review of the basins.
I think this gives us a great deal of comfort going into this next contract with them. I don't speak for anybody else, but I wasn't unhappy with the work that they were doing, but
Right.
3-year contract is a long time to just up it again. So I appreciate us going through this, and I think it gives me some level of comfort, especially with the independent review that we got, that what we're doing in our basins is effective, and Pizzo seems to be the person for that job now, so. Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
Second?
Moved by Trustee Youngerman, second by Trustee Marisak. Take the roll, please.
Trustee Youngerman.
Yes.
Trustee Marisak.
Yes.
Trustee Bond.
Yes.
Trustee Spurling.
Yes.
Trustee Lee.
Yes.
Trustee Heinz.
And that carries 6-0.
Thank you.
Move on to items for discussion this evening. Item A, which is home rule versus non-home rule powers. And we made several extra copies of this up in the front here, so if anybody doesn't have one that wants one, come down to the front and get that. And I'll just briefly outline what it is that our attorneys had drafted. Trustee Youngerman and I had met after the last meeting to kind of frame this discussion. So out of our meeting really is where these several questions came from, the first packet, and then the second packet, which is not in color, I don't think, out there, so you won't be able to see the attorney's answers, but the second packet are additional questions that Trustee Youngerman had leading up to this discussion. So with that, I don't think that staff has a report prepared for this, so if there are questions amongst the board members, we can start with that and then kind of frame the discussion based on that.
I guess I'll start. First off, I think I owe the board an apology. I think I misspoke at the last meeting when I said I wanted the shooting incident on the board agenda. I was incorrect. I should have said home rule versus non-home rule versus home rule light, and what powers we have associated with each one of those, and what we can do to really strengthen our existing ordinances. And I think, first off, I'm not necessarily a proponent of home rule. I think that there are some negatives associated with home rule. as far as the powers of additional taxation, that I'm not concerned about any of the members of this board abusing, but we don't know who's going to be in the board seats in 10 or 15 years. And that being said, I think that it's important to at least discuss the option, because once we become 25,000 people, we automatically become home rule. So we may have to cross that, we're going to have to cross that bridge at some point anyway. With all of this, all of these items occurring at the same time, and with Attorney Anderson's memo previously, as far as giving us options, as far as what we could do with our capital improvements program, with that home rule referendum, I think it potentially solves some problems. It solves really the renter accountability, landlord accountability problem. It solves the sales tax referendum problem, but then it also creates this problem of the board could tax for whatever they wanted. And I know none of us want that, and we don't necessarily want that for a future board. But we still, I think in order to be fair, have to at least have the conversation. I think in a perfect world, if we could get Home Rule Light passed in the state legislature and get this non-referendum sales tax passed to deal with our capital improvements funding issue, I think we're in fantastic shape. As long as we go and we look at what powers the board has as a non-home rule municipality, and we begin to strengthen those, and really, like Trustee Lee had said at the last meeting, give the police department and code enforcement a bigger stick. And if that means going through and really addressing our fines and our nuisance ordinance and those sort of things, let's do that, and let's really begin to put the pressure on, as a coordinated effort of village board, code enforcement, police department, HOAs, and really start to solve the problem. This is something that could have probably been discussed a couple boards ago as we were going through this population growth, but here recent circumstances have kind of brought light to it. And we need to have the discussion, and I'm interested in hearing what the other board members have to say. Everyone has the questions that I had asked, and I have additional questions. But, you know, I'll turn it over to the rest of the board members to kind of sum up what they're thinking and hear some of their questions as well.
I think past boards, I think Pete and I will verify that, the past boards talked about it because there was always a problem with houses when the wrong people bought the houses and they had nothing down and they didn't care, they were going to leave anyway. We were more worried about that at that time. And now, after the rise and now the fall, now we're having all these property concept people, these LLCs that come in, like I mentioned before, the for rent homes out of California. And these people are coming in now buying these foreclosed homes, renting them, and they're all over $100,000 houses. And they know those are the houses that are going to go up the fastest in price down the road, and then they're going to sell them and make real good profits on them. The problem is they're not around here right now on the rental. I mean, they're all out in we send the water bills to California, and it's just a case where we have a little problem there with closeness. But what I would, you mentioned the staff didn't really prepare, but I would like Rich or Jeff to at least answer the lady's question. We kind of discussed it last time, but what we do now as far as, you know, the zoning, the ordinance guy, the police department, how we follow up on some of that stuff. If you can answer that, I think that'd be your first question.
Certainly. Well, I'd just like to say that we have very good communication with the police department and community development and code enforcement. On a daily basis, either the code enforcement officer or the building inspector are in communication with the police department. So you can be assured that that communication takes place. Together, on one house in particular, every day for the last 10 days, a police department person and our building inspector have gone out on a citation situation where the house has been posted, and we're trying diligently to get to the occupant. Okay, so I want you to be assured that that communication takes place, and what the police department knows and what the community development department know about a particular house in any subdivision is communicated quite well. So be assured of that. Second, I don't know of any other community that abuts ours that has a full-time or soon-to-be a full-time person dedicated just to code enforcement. And I think that's a significant commitment by this board to make sure that our codes are being enforced out there. And that shouldn't be overlooked. I think that's very important. The situation of home rule versus non-home rule, obviously, as Trustee Youngerman pointed out, there are pluses and minuses when that goes forward. We do what we can to enforce the municipal code today and go through the proper procedures with Steve's office and post and notice to appear so that these situations do end up in court in an appropriate fashion. I hope that answers some of the question.
Thank you. There are other comments from the board?
A couple of thoughts, if I may. I think we would like to throw the idea out that maybe our nuisance ordinance language is a little vague, and I'm wondering if the board might be agreeable to do some homework on other nuisance ordinances that have been demonstrated to be effective, and maybe the county law enforcement people can help us with that too. But it looks like we might benefit from making our own police department a little more certain of what a nuisance is and what's actionable, and maybe even our residents would benefit from a better understanding of what's an actionable nuisance problem. So I'm seeing some nodding, so maybe we could pursue that.
I would agree with that, and I think that's a fantastic idea. I have with me, and I don't know if the other boards or the other board members have this, a list of the violations and what the fines are. I believe, and we'll ask Laura, or Laura can correct me if I'm wrong. A nuisance ordinance ticket starts at $25 and is $50 after a certain, if it's not paid within a certain point. And one of my, and quite on, whether it be a nuisance ordinance or a noise ordinance or whatever, quite honestly, if a police officer came up to my house and I was having a party and it was a $25 nuisance or a noise violation ticket, I'd turn it down while he was there, get my ticket, and as soon as he left, turn it back up and tell everybody there they owe me $1. And then we deal with it the next time they came out. If it's $50, we deal with it again. I've done that. I went to Ohio State, so I've done that. But what are the chances of us increasing? Maybe we have a stepped-up nuisance ordinance where maybe the first violation, if it's a nuisance, and we have the language spelled out of what a nuisance is, and we're sending resources and time and all of that sort of thing there. One of my questions was, what can we do, how can we increase our fines in certain cases? And he said, Attorney Anderson replied, as a non-home rule unit, the village has the authority to impose fines up to $750 for a single violation. Now, $750 for the first violation, I think, is excessive. But if we can have a stepped-up program where, okay, you're now becoming a nuisance, maybe the first one is $250. Maybe the second one is $500. Maybe the third one is $750. And what can, and I'll ask our attorney, if it's a nuisance ordinance violation, can we begin to go after the homeowner then? If it's, say, if it's a rental property and the homeowner does not live there, can we fine whoever's living there and then also fine who is,
Who's actually
owns?
creating the nuisance? I think you could. I mean, I think the way the ordinance is worded right now, it's very broad. It shall be unlawful for any person to permit or maintain the existence. I think that could encompass a lot of people, the people who live there, the people who own it. I think the trick is, and this has already been alluded to, is that sometimes the people who own the property are not ascertainable. You can't determine who they are.
Right.
So how do you issue a ticket? And that's probably a problem often faced by the police. You know, it's easier, it's much more simple to issue the ticket to the person who's actually there creating the nuisance. I think you could make an argument that, you know, the person who's the owner is in violation under this language. It might be a difficult thing to actually do, but I think you could do it.
Okay.
And as far as raising the fines, I certainly think you could raise those, but keep in mind, too, that if some of these cases actually get to court, we do sometimes bump the fine up substantially at that point. So sometimes that's sort of, you know, they get a chance to pay it. They can pay a slightly lower fine if they pay by this date. If they don't pay by that date, then they pay a little bit more. And if they end up in court, then we really bump it up. So we'd probably want to leave a cushion so that we can still impose closer to the maximum fine if these cases actually go to court. Because then they've taken up a lot of time and resources of our village staff and the police department. They've actually had to issue, you know, get the paperwork ready to get it to court. So that would be the only thing I'd caution, is to leave a cushion so that we can reserve those highest fines for when this case gets to court and it's taken up a lot of our time.
is the highest fine allowable via court, $750?
It's $750 for a non-home rule. Now, I should say that there's
And that's per violation.
exactly, per violation. So if you had a building code violation that was existing day after day after day, it could be $750 a day. So I mean, I believe our ordinance is worded to that effect. But yes, per violation, that's the max fine that we can impose as a non-home rule municipality.
Forgive my ignorance about the nuisance ordinance. So we could ticket them daily? They don't have a time frame
Well,
that they
if
can
the
respond and correct it?
If the nuisance was continuing to exist, if they correct it, then you've got, yeah, then you.
There's no grace period, you know, you come and tell me my grass is too high, I have a week to mow it, that type of thing?
If that was determined to be a nuisance under the statute,
When we currently have those situations where homeowners, renters, and the lawn is high and the village has to address it, who do we bill? We bill the homeowner, not the
if you have a
tenant,
weed lien.
right?
Yeah, it depends on the situation. Sometimes we have to lien it, sometimes we build the homeowner. In those situations, we do usually give them time to correct it, because that's more a compliance issue there. So we'll give them time. We won't fine them every day for that.
How can you find a homeowner if he's renting that house out and he's not responsible for the noise? He doesn't live there, he's just renting it out, so the guy that's renting the house is responsible, I would think.
I think that's a good argument that he would make if he got a ticket.
Yeah, I would,
Yeah.
I know. I mean,
Well, and then that falls to the same thing with the lawn mowing. Ultimately, you're responsible for your tenant. So if your tenant has got, you know, newspapers on the windows and that's not allowable, then you have to tell your tenant to fix it, because we don't have a lot of latitude with the tenant.
I agree with Trustee Hines, the fact that we need to concentrate on whoever's living in the home. But at some point, and I know this has occurred in my development, where I don't know if they have thick skulls or whatever, but it's just not getting through. Once again, they're in college. It's just not getting through to them. So we need to then deal with the homeowner. And I know that in certain cases, we've brought the homeowner into the PD and had a meeting with the PD. And really, once you get the landlord involved, and in this case, the landlord, I felt really bad for him. I mean, but I tell you what, he solved the problem very quickly. And so I agree with you where we should really try and solve the problem without going to whoever's owning the home. But then, at some point, I think it's no longer, I think we've got to go to whoever owns the home.
I would think the judge would throw that out if the homeowner got fined and he doesn't live there. I mean, if he lived in another town, he can't keep going check on his tenants every day, every weekend.
Lord, is that, and I'll ask the police department this as well. Can we go after, I believe we've gone after homeowners in the past.
It depends what you're talking about. The grass, you can go after the homeowner. But if it's a loud party at midnight, no, we can't go after the homeowner the next day. We have to go after the person who's creating the problem that minute.
I think you have to remember, we always said ordinances, most of the time, all we want is compliance. And that's what they're there for, and that's what we try to get them to comply. Certain instances, I drove by North Union off of Fifth Street there today, and they were emptying a house out in front, and I mean, it was just like a garbage truck full of furniture. But the realtor was there, because I seen her picture in the paper, and she was directing it out, and she must be representing, or she was the owner. Now, that case, the people are gone. I mean, I don't know where they went. And it's a house under 100,000, so they just took off. And our problem is, we don't have those, the renters aren't buying the lower-end houses. And these are, and you see them sometimes in Aurora where they've been there 10 days, where somebody should be on the owner, because you're never going to find the renter. So it depends on the situation, if it's a noise, or if it's somebody vacating the house that didn't pay the rent. But all the time, we just wanted compliance on our ordinances, and I think that's the, in fact, remember, Dan, we had a guy down here that rented a house, put a car out in the street. Remember, he took the engine out or something, and we didn't even notice it, and all of a sudden, the oil was going down the side. And we got him, I think you got him on a nuisance, but you can't get the owner there. He parked the car in the public street, so you can't get the owner of the house, but they got him to move the car back in, and then you got him to clean up the oil. But that was a case where the owner of the property don't mean anything, it's the renter.
It is difficult for us to go after the owner. It's easier to go after the owner when he's absent and he's renting. Because most of the time they have a lease, and in the clause of the lease, they have about how many times the police come to the house. And that instance Trustee Youngerman's talking about, that owner didn't know that the police were coming there that often until we told them. So it is easier.
He was probably from Ohio State, so you know.
Must have been.
A question on, follow-up on the nuisance ordinance. Would we be better served to have several nuisance ordinances that are kind of stair-stepped from, it seems now that whatever might be a nuisance all fits in one category, and that, to me, would make it much more difficult to fairly determine what the penalty should be. If the nuisance were stepped up based on the level of impact on neighboring families or public safety or public health, is that of something to look at, like several ordinances, or?
Well, I think what a possible problem you could get into is the police on the spot having to determine what level. I guess, how would you define, the benefit of it being worded so broadly is that it really is kind of a catch-all. Like, it could encompass the broken down car, it could encompass the trash, it could encompass a loud party, although that might be covered under the noise ordinance, but it's really broad. Anything on the property that's highly obnoxious or annoying. So I think having it broad allows it to encompass more things. And if we were to make it more specific, we certainly could do that. But then I think you'd have to consider how you would do that in such a way that the police would be able to determine at which level they should issue the ticket. And I don't know that, I mean, I think it would be better to have, in my opinion, have the nuisance ordinance stay fairly broad, But perhaps we could put in something for repeat offenders, as you had suggested earlier, Trustee Youngerman, so that if there's someone who's consistently doing it, and I'm sure that the code department is monitoring those people who have these consistent problems anyways, so eventually they're probably going to end up in court and get hit with a big fine. So that would be my thought. I mean, we certainly can look into reworking this if you'd like to make it more specific, to add in more, more examples, but there is some benefit to keeping it broad.
Is there any downside to it being so broad? When you go to court, do you have a
Well-
problem with it being too broad?
The only concern, I've not had a problem with it being too broad in front of a judge, but the only concern is if it gets too broad, it could be declared unconstitutionally vague by the court. That could happen because it's so broad that it doesn't put people on notice what a nuisance is. And I think this might be towing the line a little, but I think again, having it broad kind of keeps your options open. I mean, and maybe the chief can speak to this, that I'm sure there are things that are clearly annoying everyone's neighbors, and if you were to define all of those things in the code, you'd fill the whole code up. So I think there can be a benefit to having it a little bit more broad.
That is correct. We haven't used that ordinance that much because of that. And just make sure everybody knows, we don't issue that a ticket. So we don't go out like a speeding ticket or a snow violation. It has to be written out in a long-form notice to appear. And you have to define what that nuisance is. So you'd have to say what it is. And that's not defined in our code book like most codes are in there are defined. And you just have to fill in the blanks, so date, time, and where.
So would it help you for us to be a little bit more specific?
Yes, but I also caution it to get too specific, then we won't have the right leverage.
Would this be an option to have the ordinance be broad with perhaps a guideline, some guidelines? This is what the intent is. This is broad, but here's some guidelines that
Sure.
you would be able to share with the officers to give you some parameters to work within so that they're not on the spot trying to make a decision.
Yeah, absolutely. We use nuisance abatement right now for drugs and guns. That's really spelled out real easy in the law, but this, what we're talking about tonight is not. So, yeah, I would, if most leases say the first time the police come, you're out. So we could have an ordinance that says the third time the police come to the house for a documented nuisance, then maybe they could be fined, if we could.
Fined or out?
Well, we can't,
Yeah, we couldn't kick them
You don't have the
out.
power to do that.
right, we would just take them to court and let our attorney deal with it.
Or maybe part of the guideline would be the third time that we visit the house for a nuisance, the extra step is we contact the landlord, so that they're aware, like you said, the landlord had no idea that there was a nuisance going on, that after the third time, we do contact the landlord to put them on notice that you have a bad tenant. that
And we actually,
continue to have problems.
We only give those type of situations one time.
Yeah, so he's saying it's not a ticket they give, so even the first time, if there's a nuisance violation that they determine, and that's the other thing too, it's really the village police department's or code enforcement's definition of a nuisance and a residence, whether it's a good resident or a bad resident, it's kind of not arbitrary, but it's your decision versus theirs, is this a nuisance or not? So I think that it would probably be better served for our residents, those who want to follow the rules and regulations, to define that somewhat so that they know when they're operating within that or clearly not. And that way it's not a judgment call as much when a police officer goes to the house, when I think my opinion is that sometimes there's this disconnect in what it actually is a nuisance violation. And you said that we don't seem to issue so many of those, and maybe that's one of the reasons. The other comment I wanted to make was, and I appreciate that this discussion to this point has stayed kind of away from the fact that it's rentals versus non-rentals, because you can have people who own homes who are a nuisance as well. And gearing up to this with all the information that we've had this week and last week, it was tough for me personally because a lot of the ordinances that we've seen, I pulled the Village of Lyle's ordinance on multifamily, which doesn't directly relate to any sort of nuisance violation, which is the problem that we're really having. Related more to, and it allowed inspections or requires inspections when a house turns over, but that's not really the problem that we have. And so the premise of that ordinance is that it's for safety inside the house, so for electrical, for plumbing, for smoke detectors and that, and that's not the situation that we're faced with now. So I think if we can, and we're not going to come up with a solution on the nuisance ordinance tonight, but if it's something that maybe staff can take a look at, either strengthening this or come up with reasons why we shouldn't strengthen this kind of ordinance, and what to do, if anything, about the fees. I think that there seems to be general consensus that we could at least look at that. And that's something within our current authority as a non-home rule municipality to do that, which is an added benefit because that would be more of an immediate impact. Okay.
Another thought on the inability to connect with the landlord sometimes, or the owner. As a village, we provide financially defined service to each lot, water, and to some extent, other types of services. Could we use that as a lever to insist that we know how to reach the actual owner of that property before we activate those utilities?
We do that right now to the best of our abilities. I think the problem comes in some of the bank-owned situations where we have trouble tracking it down. But I would say for the most part, we do usually have renter and owner
Joint.
information. Because from the water standpoint, the owners are, eventually, ultimately responsible if we don't get payment from the renter.
But that's on kind of a more of a reactionary basis, where if we're notified, or if if I'm the landlord and I never transfer over the water, I have an agreement that I'll pay it, we'll never know who's really living in there, and nor do we need to know that unless there's a problem, unless we have somebody who is a nuisance as defined.
Can we switch to a different
Yeah?
topic as well? This one maybe is difficult to get our arms around too, but the issue of too many, or what seems to be too many people living in a single-family home is a recurring complaint. And there may well be instances where the absentee landlord has no idea how many people are actually in that house. Do we have any way to engage in situations like that where we feel that the house is being overused or the neighborhood is being annoyed by the activity in that house based on the number of people there?
Well, as we stated in the memo, I mean, there are limits on the limits you can place on how many people can live in a home. You can't limit it based on familiar relationships. So if people, even if you think it's too many, if the people are all related, technically they have a constitutional right to live together. I think where you get into an issue is something that Mayor Brawley already brought up, is health code violations. I mean, if the house is not equipped for 20 people to live there, if it's meant for 4 people and there's 20 people, that's, I think, where you cite them. But and you can enact an ordinance limiting the number of non-related people that can live in a single-family home. I mean, we already do that. You zone. Yes, you can zone for single-family residents, but you can't, again, that doesn't prevent people of different degrees of relationship, as long as it's a familial relationship, from living together. You can't limit that number, but you can limit the number of non-related people who will live in a single-family home, where it's zoned for single-family home.
How do you define related? Is that clearly laid out?
Well, that's, well, I can tell you, based on the case law out there, I mean, if the person is, I mean, maybe at like fifth cousin you'd stop, but I would say anyone an extended family member, I would say that's considered related in terms of, the case law out there. It is a constitutionally protected right to live with people that you're related to. And I would say that would probably include, it's obviously more than your immediate family, because no one disputes that right. It's probably grandparents, cousins, aunts, uncles. It can be that far. That's what I would say. I wouldn't recommend any ordinance that would place a restriction based on the degree of relation, because you do run the risk that it's unconstitutional. And a home rule unit could not do that either. That's something that's unconstitutional. So no entity could enact that type of a law.
But if it's say, for instance, it's a 4-bedroom home, maximum 8 people,
Right.
2 people per bedroom.
I think, again, I think that's where you're more in the health code violation area, where if you can't necessarily prohibit that, but if you discover that it's occurring, it is a violation of the health code. So you could get them on that. But you can't pass an ordinance to prevent people moving in together. Do you kind of see what I'm saying? I mean, if you catch them doing that, that's a violation of the health code.
If you have a lot of kids, though, you could have 4 kids in bunk beds in one room. I thought that, I was on the impression that the state law constitutional was 11 people, and they all had to be related, so that you could have, you know, brother, sister, whatever, and then cousin, and then their brother, sister, and then cousin, and their brother, sister. So you can come up with 11 people, and that's how Aurora finally all went to just your square footage, not how many bedrooms or whatever. They went to square footage, and if you had a 8 by 10, you could only have 2 people staying in that smaller bedroom, say. And that's how you keep your constitutional rights, is they went by square footage of people in. But I thought state law said you could have 11 people in a house out in Lakewood, say, and it's constitutional right, they can do that. Am I right or wrong? I was intending,
I'm not sure of a specific, I actually don't know
it's an
that.
odd amount, but I remember it as 11.
The International Building Code, which we're a part of, requires 200 square feet per person. So that's one parameter that can be used.
Okay.
I'm not aware of anything that says 11 related persons. It does say in our code, it talks about immediate family, and it goes on to explain grandparents and children and what have you. For the non-related persons, our code does say no more than 5 people per home. So that with the 200 square foot per person is what we use currently.
With our current language, maybe this is code enforcement question, do we have the ability to go up to a house and say, we think there may be too many people living here, we need to discuss that?
It's a very slippery slope. I've been through this with Steve Anderson before, and it's a very difficult thing to prove and to gain access to determine.
Is there, since we're laying things out on the table here and we're in a rethinking mode, is that an issue that needs to be rethought? Can we do better than we're doing now in that regard?
Well, we might be able to do better, but constitutionally, I think is the real question.
Yeah, it's tough to, it's tough to come up with a basis to go into the home unless there's been a complaint or some issue. I mean, and then it's hard to establish that these people, I mean, I would imagine, how do you show that they're not, if they say they're related, it's kind of a tough battle to start fighting. I mean, it is tough to enforce.
And assuming that we could, and we have, 6,000 houses, let's say, no more than 100 of those is even close to this probably. I'm just using this as an example. If the village of Montgomery started knocking on doors, asking who lives in this house, how many people live in this house, we're going to get an amazing amount of calls on this board and from staff. And I think at some point that starts to infringe on their rights and their enjoyments of their own property without just cause. And that's my opinion, but and another thing too is that's not the problem. That's not the issue that we're having. That would be a secondary issue, like, well, you guys are creating a problem, and the nuisance thing didn't work, so now we're going to see if there's too many people living here. And what's to say I got 5 guys, and they're going to say, well, he doesn't live here. And so then how do you prove that? And it just seems like one of those ordinances that municipalities or states enact that's unenforceable.
Well, let me ask this. I know one of my questions that I had submitted was, can Montgomery create a landlord accountability program or a renter accountability program without becoming home rule? And Attorney Wilson, I believe.
Pete and I, yeah,
Okay.
Pete, Steve, and I.
Their response was, we would need more information on the nature of the proposed programs. As the village is limited to its non-home rule authority, there are limits on the restrictions it can impose and the penalties it can assess against both landlords and tenants. So, as I read that, there is something we can do that we don't have in place now, although what we potentially could do would be somewhat minor.
Yeah, I guess I'd need a little, I actually looked up that term, and some of the programs that I found, I'm not sure if that's what was intended.
I came up with that term.
Oh, okay. There are some landlord accountability programs, but they're actually designed at ensuring that tenants have recourse against the landlord. So I guess, again, we don't have the authority to license, rental companies. We don't have that authority as a non-home rule, for regulation purposes. We would have that if we were home rule. So I guess in terms of what type of program were you thinking, or just?
Well, because when Matt and I sat down and discussed this, he had brought Aurora's, which obviously Aurora's home rule.
Yeah.
They can do pretty much what they
Do
want.
what they want.
And let me ask this of staff, who we've brought in from other municipalities, how is Sugar Grove dealing with this problem? Because I'm assuming they've got the same problems that Montgomery has. I'm assuming Yorkville has the same problems that Montgomery has. Are there any non-home rule municipalities that have good ordinances on the books right now that have stood up in court that we can somehow adopt and interpret as our own and go from there? Is there a landlord accountability program or a renter accountability program in a non-home rule municipality in the Chicagoland area?
I think that's something we could look into. Again, we wouldn't have the authority to necessarily, I think the problem is we wouldn't have the authority, because we can't license them, that gives us, that makes it more difficult for us to regulate them as an entity, as a business. So they're of course subject to the same code of ordinances that everyone else is, and they can, be, ticketed and whatnot. But I guess that's something maybe we could look into more. I'm not, like I said, I tried to do some research on it, and I don't think that was what you had intended. There was another landlord accountability. I think you mean some mechanism for putting in place standards that landlords would have to follow, sort of like almost like a landlord tenant code, or
Right.
something. So more ordinances directed at the landlords? Because-
And like I stated in the previous meeting, I'm not against renters.
Sure.
I'm against people who aren't accountable.
Sure.
And that occurs in rentals, that occurs as homeowners. And there's a certain accountability. And one of my other questions is, if these rental companies purchase these homes and then they rent them out, and how do we know that they're doing background check? How do we know that they're not renting to a sex offender?
They're required by Illinois state statute to register. So that's not the landlord's. That sex offender has a right to rent a property. You can't regulate whether they can live there or not. And as a municipality, they have a right to live in the municipality. They just have to register with the PD.
Well, then
You can't-
obviously we
you can't
know how I
stop
feel about that.
And you picked one,
It's a civil
one-
liberties
yeah,
issue that you can't
right.
stop on people's civil liberties.
in your example, you picked one crime. And so if there's,
How about the civil liberties of the little kids that are running around the house that?
Well, that's
the
why they
sex
have to
offender-
register.
I think that discussion, if that relates to sex offenders, is far above and beyond what this board has the power to regulate.
But
I think
no, you see my point. We have these rental companies that it's their sole purpose is to make money, and they don't have any accountability to the communities that they're renting in.
Some of them may. We don't know that for sure. But I think what we're talking about here is more oversight, more government, more watching in on what our residents are doing. And I don't mean to imply that the situation that we had at one or X number of houses was not a big deal. I'm saying that there are 17,000 plus people in this village that abide by the rules and regulations, and to create another oversight of this local government onto their liberties just seems a little bit, I get really weary of that, because, and I was talking with my wife. It's like when we were in high school on the soccer team. If one guy was late to class or late to the practice, the whole team had to run. So the crime doesn't or the punishment doesn't fit the crime, and just because one person did something wrong, we're going to take away the rights of the rest of our citizens. So I think the discussion that we had so far, the nuisance ordinance, revisiting that, I think is a direct correlation to nuisance houses. That's exactly what the discussion should have been framed around, and I think that was a good suggestion, Trustee Bond. One question is you brought up the other municipalities that are non-home rule that do have some form of rental code, and I referenced this before, but I just want to read this off. I spot checked a few of them. I used to work in Lisle. I know that they're not home rule. So I pulled their ordinance and I talked to a landlord in their town today, and the whole ordinance doesn't relate to accountability of landlords or renters. I think everybody's held to the same standard of following the city's rules and the state's, but these inspections that occur are supposed to occur after every tenant moves out, after the sale of the property, and this only regulates multi-tenant buildings. So single-family homes, it wouldn't count for that. And I don't know if we have the authority to do that or not. But all of the inspections is smoke detectors, sprinklers, doors and windows can't be broken, electrical and plumbing fixtures, appliances, and the landlord that I had called had to do $100,000 in upgrades to bring his building up to current codes. And we're getting way off topic with what we're trying to solve here. So that's just one of the 20 or so that were listed that I pulled because I knew I had some experience in that town. So I figured I would share that with you guys.
But I guess getting back on track, as I look through these ordinances, or these fines and stuff for these ordinance violations, I think that we could look at a lot of them, parking in the snow. I mean, $25 fine. Big deal. So it's never going to solve the problem if we don't begin to make it sting.
If somebody's a repeat parking in the snow person, I understand that comes with its own realm of regulating that with the amount of snow. But if somebody, it's their second time, do we have leeway or authority to say, you have a notice to appear in court, and then go to court and raise the fine as we would need? So, and like Trustee Lee said, the goal is not to go out and write tickets to all of our residents when it snows, is to actually get people off the street so we can plow. And parking on the sidewalk is for public safety. It's not to raise money for the village, or I guess the deterrent is the amount of money. But if somebody does it once, fine, they get a $25 ticket. They rip it up and throw it on the ground. The next day we show up and we issue them a notice to appear. So I think maybe it doesn't happen inside this room, but that's the message that we need to send to our staff and our police department and our code enforcement, is that we need to enforce these laws uniformly to all of our residents, whether it's somebody who accidentally parks on the sidewalk the first or second time, then that should be treated similarly to somebody that has a nuisance. I mean, that's why laws are created. So maybe we give them that bigger stick and say that you guys need to define the nuisance that a little bit better and enforce the parking in the snow and parking over the sidewalk, because those are things that we currently have and we're not reinventing the wheel.
And if memory serves, the PD does not enforce the sidewalk during the winter months, correct? Because of getting the cars off the street, they often will need to block the sidewalk?
Well, that is ineffective, for sure, but we haven't put out a notice saying we don't do it, that I know of.
I kind of had the implication that it might be unwritten, that they get that they have to get their car off the street, and the driveway can only hold so many cars, so they have to block the sidewalk a little bit.
That's what a garage is for.
Yeah, no,
No?
not to my knowledge.
Okay. Are there any other comments on?
President Foley.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make a quick comment, and if the village attorney could assist here. I think one thing that is important for not just the resident, but the landlords to know, they have rights as well. So if they, outside of the village, outside of that, have a lease with someone, they can put that nuisance agreement in place when they
Exactly.
rent to that person.
Right.
So that can say, hey, if the police are called here 3 times with our agreement outside of it, because yes, the home rule thing is, again, we're going back and forth, but as a landlord, you can do that. And maybe sometimes people don't realize that they have those rights to do that. So maybe that's something we can educate a little bit more on, or put something maybe on our village webpage to say, here's some rights as a landlord, because we're looking at all the rights of the renters, but the landlord has that right. And if they're more educated about it, they can probably make some better decisions.
That's a good point. If we could put something on our webpage about kind of some guidelines as far as renting.
And one topic that didn't come up today that I think warrants discussion, or at least we should discuss as a board, is the proposition or the idea of home rule versus non-home rule going out for referendum. Trustee Youngerman stated the finance end of it that we've been working on for a while now. Is there any discussion amongst the board about that proposal?
Everybody just got their Illinois municipal booklet, I think, for this month, and in it was an article about how the towns that are smaller than 25,000 that have tried to pass this, like Trustee Youngerman said, the people just will not pass it. And as we're sitting here, probably all of us trustees wouldn't vote for it, because you just never know what's going to happen. It's going to take us a while, like I said before, to get to 25,000, so we can carry it for a long time if they pass that home rule, non-home rule ordinance down in the legislature right now. If that can be passed in the next session, then we won't have to worry about this home rule thing, because home rule is a lot in taxes and things, so. But I can't see us trying to even try to pass that, because we're not for it, so why would the people be for it and vote for it?
And I agree with you 100%. I would love, I don't want to do home rule, and I think that most of the people here don't want to do home rule. But if we could get more meat on the bone of our ordinances, I think that begins to solve the problem. And then hope that home rule light passes.
Well, if you don't mind, I'll relay the conversation that you and I had about this. You're right. This board, I think, has worked very well together over the last just about a year, so the group of us. But if you were to ask me a year ago today whether or not I would personally vote for home rule, I would say no. And if you asked me 2 years ago, and no offense to the people that were here, if you didn't have a cohesive board, or at least that talked things out, you know, who knows what could happen, the different types of requirements or taxes that could just happen before anybody knows about it. And I posed the question to you a year ago, and once you pass this referendum, let's say we could pass that a year from now, that exists forever. So we're going to all be gone in a short time. What's going to happen when the next board comes in? And that's the part where I'm uncomfortable, is I know personally I would do everything to make sure that we didn't abuse that type of ordinance, but we don't have that kind of control once we're gone.
If home rule light passes, it's not automatic. We would have to referendum that. It's automatic?
No,
No.
as it's drafted now,
It becomes effective the date they pass it.
yeah, and I've told Steve this too, that
Pilot, yeah.
it might never pass. It might not pass this session, next session, or 3 sessions from now. It's something that we have people from our Council of Government working on that. But if it does pass, then this board will still have to pass an ordinance to implement anything that we want that's extra than what we currently do, just like we do with everything. So nothing is just given to you, and the next day we can send our, police department to the house about this, so.
Well, we could regulate a lot of this sizing and how many people in the house, and you could use the same type of situation as Aurora that has home rule, or Oswego or anybody like that, but you gotta give Chicago something before they all vote to help us little guys.
But you guys see why we had to have, just to be fair and just, why we had to have the conversation of home rule versus non-home rule, because it was presented as an option in one of those, in one of Attorney Anderson's memos. I mean, yeah, it has no chance, but we at least had to talk about it.
Yeah, and I kind of appreciate that we did that for an audience here today. For those of you who don't know, usually there's at least only 2 of you here. So this is a huge crowd for us.
Thank
So
you
we
for
had
coming.
this discussion about home rule and non-home rule tonight. We discussed it about 3 or 4 weeks ago at the last board meeting or committee of the whole. So if I can move things along a little bit, I think that there was general consensus that we should take a look at our nuisance ordinance, and staff, if you can take a look at what we could possibly do, what you'd be comfortable with, and come back to us with some recommendations on that, and also the fees, or at least an explanation about the fees going along with that. Does that sound about right for everybody?
Tried to take copious notes while you guys have been speaking, so we will try and
Awesome.
follow up and bring something back to you.
Mr. President, I would like to say, because we have put it in the paper, our picture's been in the paper, but I know some people out there, and the night she was presented it, I don't think hardly anybody was here, but I will, since we got more people here now, I'll mention it. Laura was given the award for the outstanding code enforcement in the United States. And we gave her that, or she brought her plaque in to show us. So she is one of the top in the country and just was presented with that award. So maybe that will relieve some of your concerns too about how good Laura is, because I'm just glad she's here.
Excellent. And then I just wanted to wrap up. All the neighbors that are here this evening, I know that you're doing this, but know your neighbors, know your neighborhood, contact the police department, or call 911 if you see a suspicious vehicle, or if it's a code enforcement violation, contact them, and we will send a police officer out there to check that out. I think that there was a disconnect on that previously with dispatch and, who is going to send who and what out there. But now I think it's been pretty documented that if we make a 911 call, then it comes directly to us, and dispatch doesn't really have, the CENTCOM dispatch doesn't have that, it's not their decision to make, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. And so before we move on this evening, I would like to take about a 5-minute break at this point. It's been just a little bit over an hour, so if it pleases everybody, we'll take a 5-minute break and we'll re-adjourn. Which is fiscal year 2015 water budget, and there was an agenda item for you in your packet. And with that, I will, who wants this? Turn it over to Director of Finance, Justin Van Voren.
Have a memo that shows the proposed budget. I'm in stereo here.
Sorry.
That's right. It goes through the water fund, and if there are any questions on the water fund, I can certainly answer those. We are proposing an increase in the base and usage rates that are included in the packet. And then there are several items included in water operations, addition of a maintenance worker in water department, as well as an increase in maintenance for the well houses, and the unit that receives all the reads every month needs to be replaced. If there are any questions about those items, I can certainly answer those.
Thank you for the very, very in-depth report on the water fund.
Absolutely.
Are there any questions of Justin on the water and sewer? Or
I
more
have
the
a quick
water
question.
operations?
On the bill, is that the 0267 is going to 4? You with me?
Yes.
Now, that sewer base, I was the one that kind of brought that up 10 years ago and just said it's a sewer, kind of sewer tax for when we had that problem out at one on Montgomery Road. Bills, where we had that $89,000 bill for old sewer that was not Fox Valley. So we had to come up with the money for it, and we had no money. So I said, put it down at sewer, and we'll start a little tax to collect money for things like that. But can you change that instead of saying, and I think I brought this up once before, instead of saying sewer, I guess it was for sewer, but if you can kind of put it so that people don't think it's Fox Valley sewer. I mean, something like old facility sewer, or come up with some,
Legacy, perhaps?
Director Pumas, do you want to explain the sewer that we do? I mean, there's a significant, I think, amount of sewer that we own and
Yeah.
operate and maintain, right?
Basically, the collection system within the village is under the village's maintenance jurisdiction. There's a longstanding understanding, I don't know if I'd call it an agreement, I don't know if it's that firm, but the 15-inch diameter pipe and above is Fox Metro and below that is Village. So most of the sanitary sewers within the neighborhoods are much smaller than 15-inch diameter, 6, 8-inch type of pipes. So the village is responsible for maintaining those lines, as well as we have 2 lift stations, Jefferson Street and one on Route 25 near Elmer's, it's on the other side of the street. So the money that we've been collecting with that dollar has been a first step in establishing a regular maintenance program for our sanitary sewer system. So some of the things we'll do with that is sewer televising, root removal. We do a chemical additive to suppress root growth in certain areas of towns. We have a list of manholes that need to be rehabilitated. They're old brick manholes. I mean, as you can imagine, most of the sewer systems in this area are quite old, parts of them are. So that's the basics of it.
So it really is for sewer.
it is really for sewer, but it's more for the, like the one on, out here was only like 6 inches. I mean, and then they had to tear up all of Montgomery Road for days, and it was a costly thing. We had no money in the budget anywhere for that. And the problem is, I've had people since then say, what's the sewer on my water bill? Is that Fox Valley or part of it? And you go, no. And then I go through, explain all of it. But I don't know if you could put it for sewer maintenance is a good word there, sewer maintenance of.
We can look at what we can call it. I think most people are getting used to it. I know like Oswego, we have that on our bills too. Yorkville has. I mean,
Yeah.
more places are seeing that in addition to Fox Metro, that they're paying their municipality a sewer charge too. But we can
Yeah,
certainly
we're
look at the
actually, I
wording.
would say, probably in the minority of communities that for a long time did not collect the sewer fee. And I think under inspection, you'd see that what we're collecting now is on the very low end of those charges. And I appreciate that we're collecting it because it's been helpful, but I don't want anyone to leave here thinking that we are building up a reserve to handle that type of emergency. We're not. We generally spend that money each year. You know, we try to, whether it's through relining or something. Fox Metro has allowed us to piggyback on some of their contracts to, you know, stretch our dollars when we think it's a good bargain for us. But so it's a good first step, but again, it's not building up any type of reserve. So if we had another collapse like that,
I think that was the problem. When I said that, I said, make it 50 cents and times the houses and we can get some additional money, and it went at 50 cents. I thought, well, that's chicken feed. Should have put it higher. Nobody cares about 50 cents a month. So now I think it's probably still a little low at 250, but.
Well, and if you can, not to throw any neighboring municipality under the bus, but the third page of the memo highlights the other towns that do have this. Some of them don't, and it could be like the bids where certain things are different, incorporated where and whatnot, but you see Sugar Grove is at 10 and Yorkville's at 18 for this type of flat sewer fee. So one comment that I wanted to make on the second page was just the units. You can see them on the next page, but the water base is going to be $4 per billing cycle, right? Or is that per month?
That is $4 per billing cycle.
Okay, so for 2 months.
I have a question. I'm sorry. Are you,
No, go ahead. And then the usage rate will be $5.10 per 1,000 gallons.
Correct.
Yeah.
when these old prices, when was the last time there was an increase on the old pricing?
2 years ago.
2 years?
2 years ago?
Because we didn't do one this past year.
We had a gradual increase for a couple of years there in a row, just without even, it just automatically went up. We put it that way like 3 years ago or something.
What staff is proposing with this, the increase in the village water, the village rate is 4%, and we're proposing a 2-year increase at 4%, and then 3% thereafter. So we would be looking at a year after year increase from here on out. We would certainly look at it every year, but
Yeah.
we are proposing 4% for 2 years and then 3% thereafter.
So 4, and then 3. And they're-
And I think maybe the difference here between this and some other personnel type issues, this is a hard cost for us. I mean, what we've calculated at least is the cost to maintain our water infrastructure over the life of this. So this is not undocumented, so. Are there any other questions on?
Yeah, one last thing I would like, and I've said it before, I would like, Justin, for you to get what the, after this rate, or before this rate comes out, which will be the next budget, come out with what the other towns have to show us, because the last time we put this out, we were like the 8th, or we were the 9th lowest out of the 10 surrounding communities. And I just want to put it out so we know that.
We lobbed that softball up for you.
You lobbed that softball up.
Yeah.
So up on the screen right now.
Okay.
We actually did obtain from Aurora, North Aurora, Oswego, Sugar Grove, and Yorkville. It's on the page behind the memo. We did obtain all the rates, not only the flat fees for each billing cycle, but also the usage rates. And the charts in the bottom, it's unincorporated is in the blue, and then, incorporated is in the blue and unincorporated is in the red. So the brighter blue is where the rates are currently, and where the little hand is now, that is where the rates would go to. We are still the second lowest of the surrounding communities on the incorporated side. And then on the unincorporated side, looking at Aurora, Sugar Grove, and then Montgomery, we are still the lowest of the 3 communities in terms of the unincorporated charges as well.
I guess I just like 10, because it puts us even lower, or more people above us on the cost, but that's not, this is good enough. Because I know Plainfield and some of them are a lot higher too, so.
This is the first time I've seen this comparison, including sewer and infrastructure and everything. I like this. This is holistic, so I appreciate that. Any other questions on the water fund this evening? Certainly, if you review this at night or on the weekend and you have additional questions, this will be in the next, I think, a month from now, we'll have the first reading.
That's what I was going to say. With that, in Justin's memo, he also listed the funds that have not covered. They're listed on the screen for you right now. These are really the funds that the activity doesn't really change from year to year. Debt service is, what it is. The SSAs are pretty stable. So unless there are specific questions, we're really not going to cover those. With that, we've then covered all the funds. So there will not be a discussion at the March 24th meeting. We would have the public hearing and first reading of the ordinance on April 14th, and second reading of the ordinance on April 28th, looking for adoption there. But in the meantime, if you have other questions or issues that haven't come up, bring them up to us offline and bring them up at the March 24th meeting. At April 14th, it'd be nice to be pretty well set at that date, so. But we still got time between first and second reading. So this isn't to say you're done with, if you've still got issues that haven't come up or you feel haven't been resolved, please continue to bring those up to us. But at this point, we feel we've presented all the pertinent items to you.
One comment, I know that we do have a digital copy of the budget posted on the village website. Could you let us know or notify us when that's the final? Because I know that we picked a few things out of the budget for this year. So once that's final, that'll give us the opportunity to download it, same with the residents.
we'll make a couple minor changes and get that out there
Okay. I know
very
that
soon.
residents appreciate that, and so will I, so, thank you. If there aren't any other comments on the water budget, we'll move on this evening to 7C, which is the capital improvement program funding discussion. And again, you will find a memo from Justin in your packet this evening. And Justin, do you have anything else to add to this, or you want to summarize what the discussion was about?
At the February 10th board meeting, the village board had asked us to look into when the sales tax agreements would end and when the debt service maturities were. What this discussion goes through is looking at when those agreements expire and the maturities of the debt service, what that means to the capital improvement program, specifically the road maintenance program. And I can certainly go through the memo if you want me to. Basically, from staff's viewpoint, because of the delay we would see in terms of these different items, not only the sales tax incentive agreements, but also the debt service, that we don't feel that we could actually recover from delaying this. The last agreement expiring in 2028, we would build up to $17 million in arrears of projects by 2025, and it would take over 30 years to take all of those projects and complete them.
We're basically talking 44 years from now, it'll be fully funded, and that's assuming, this is a huge assumption in here, this is pretty conservative. The huge assumption is that the PCI, or the condition of the roads, is not going to deteriorate exponentially at some point. So, for those of you that are driving on Seasons Ridge Boulevard or whatnot for the last few weeks, the condition of those roads, we would have no method of fixing that for 44 years by the time we kind of got caught up.
That is why staff is recommending against it, that we don't feel we would actually catch up, because that PCI will not stay the same. From the time the last program was done to 2008, it had gone down 5 points. If you continue that throughout the program, the PCI would definitely increase, which means we would have to spend more dollars to fix the roads, and we just don't feel like we could catch up.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you, Justin. Are there any other discussion? Kind of what stemmed from this, and he said that a little bit, was our February 10th meeting, where staff presented us with several options for funding our capital program going forward. We all know that there's currently no funding source for our capital program, specifically our roads, and they highlighted 2 or 3 different options. One would be the home rule referendum, the second one would be a sales tax referendum, and the third one would be there's some sort of a business tax district, or probably the most undesirable one in my mind would be vehicle stickers for all of our residents, which, off the top of my head would be $350 a household a year, and that's passing all of this on directly to our residents. And so I've said this before, I think that the sales tax is the least, asking our residents to approve a sales tax referendum would be the least cumbersome upon our residents. When you have Sam's Club opening, that's going to draw people from anywhere from 50 miles out, or whatever they said their jurisdiction is. So that's obviously where I stand on this issue. I'd be very anxious to hear what the board thinks about this, if you don't mind.
I agree. I would support non-home rule sales tax referendum. As I said in the previous meeting, I want to spread that burden out beyond our borders as much as we can. And I think with the figures that Justin had given us, each 0.25% is approximately $425,000 in additional revenue. And so if we do a 1% increase, if I spend $100, it's an extra $1. So you don't really, and it's still, and I have the tax rate information right here, we're still going to be at the, pretty much the bottom of the list as far as our general tax rate.
Thank you, Steve.
I would also agree. I think this will be our best option. When I think about the situation as a homeowner and a taxpayer, the biggest selling point is we are spreading out that tax burden beyond the borders of Montgomery. When I put my trustee hat on, what is most attractive to me about this option is that the voters will tell us yes or no if this is what they want. I think there's also a predictability to it. When you gave us the projections, there's more reliability to this option as well. And when we compare it to some of the other options, to me, there would be less staff or less of a need for additional staff. So I find that this option is most attractive. I would be in support of putting this on the ballot, and I would also make sure I got myself to the polls and voted yes on it.
Thank you.
Yeah, the quicker we can do this with Sam's Club coming in, because talking to Chris, they get from people from all over an area, not just our village limits, so they're gonna get a lot of people in there paying sales tax that are not from Montgomery. And yet they're using our roads to get here, so.
One comment I would make, if I may, I probably should. I've spoken against raising the sales tax on previous occasions. And I think it's important for the public to know that a great deal of homework has gone into this. I don't think anyone really wants to raise the cost of living on anybody, and that's really not what's happening here. What we're trying to do is an ounce of prevention and a pound of cure. We've looked at every option we could think of to raise the funds to try to keep up with the work that we have to do, and I think it's pretty much unanimous that this is the best and most citizen-friendly choice we have. So not to belabor the point, but I would like very much for the public to know this has been an exhaustive process. We've talked about every option we could possibly think of, including doing nothing. And where we are is this is the choice.
The lesser of the evils. We have to fix the roads. Otherwise, and as we heard from Engineer Wallers, that, you know, the longer you wait, the more it costs. So the sooner we can get the funds coming in, the better we would be. What ballot would this go on?
We're shooting for November.
Okay.
Okay. I appreciate all your comments this evening. What I'd like to do at this point is work through a plan with the board with this so we can get the information out to the residents and make sure that they understand everything that we went through, because when you bring this up in a conversation like I did with my parents, it didn't go well for the first 10 minutes. I'm not going to lie to you guys. And so
They were fine when I talked to them.
So I think getting the information, getting individuals the information, and kind of putting that out there over the next several months will be important. So I think that we will have discussions at the board level for the next 2 or 3 months before we actually pass a resolution to put this on for November. And so if you certainly have any questions between now and then, direct them to Justin or Jeff or me, and we'll go from there. And I appreciate it.
Is there some limitations as to us marketing
Yes.
and such?
Yes, and we'll go over, Steve's prepared memo on that we can break back out, but once you guys have voted on it, then you're limited as to what you can do.
So
Okay.
you're going door to door this weekend prior to voting.
So, yes, we need to do this.
And just anybody that's going to the polls on Tuesday, this will not be on the ballot next Tuesday.
Jeff is good, but he's not that good.
Okay, if there isn't anything else on this, is there any new or unfinished business to come before the board this evening? Hearing none, we'll move on. Future meetings, Plan Commission this Thursday, March 13th, Historic Preservation, March 17th on Monday, is that accurate?
Yes,
Denny?
St. Patrick's Day.
Okay. The Committee of the Whole meeting of March 18th has been canceled effective tonight, and I would encourage and implore all voting citizens to get out to the polls that evening. And beautification on March 19th, intergovernmental on March 24th, and the Village Board meeting of March 24th. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second?
Moved in second, take the roll, please.
Trustee Marisak?
Yes.
Trustee Bond?
Yes.
Trustee Spurling?
Yes.
Trustee Lee? Trustee Youngerman?
Yes.
That carries 5-0. We're adjourned. Thank you.
Yeah, what?